My name is Kim Pare. I grew up in Hamilton, born and raised in Hamilton. Went to high school there, went to McMaster University, so it's pretty well been Hamilton almost all our life. We live just outside of Hamilton now, which is called Ancaster. Grew up with 3 kids in the family, pretty normal, pretty normal growing up, family vacations, did stuff, played a lot of sports. That's about it. Like, other than that, pretty boring. I always wanted a family, because some of the best memories I had was, family vacations. As going with my parents, my dad was actually from Timmins, going up there, going out to Saskatchewan, where my mom was from. To me, so family was just, it's just to get together and to go on things and do things together. And I look forward to that in a bigger aspect. So part of becoming a dad was to have this family that you could do stuff with, that you all really enjoy, and also to guide them along their path, hopefully to become good people. Never press them to do anything, but just be good people. Now, Katie was interesting. So when my son was born, which was 6 years earlier, he had colic and screamed for like 2 months straight, and was just like every night was hell. Katie was born, 3rd night home, she slept all the way through the night. And we woke up in the morning and we ran in. And we thought we must be terrible parents. Something happened during the night we weren't there for. But she was there, just sleeping, and that's the kind of kid she was. She was just so peaceful at times, so loving and peaceful and kind, just like being in the family. She loved being in the family unit. That's where she was most comfortable. And from the 3rd day home, she was like that. Yeah. So the things I remember most are the family vacations and how much she enjoyed the family. The extended family, birthdays, all that stuff. She absolutely loved. And for the most part, she was very happy, quiet, loving, caring child. At 3 years old, my dad died, and my mom was upset. And she went over to my mom and said, "Don't worry, you still have us." At 3 years old. So she had that kind of compassion, at a very early age. Where she struggled was when, and we sort of noticed it was when she would go like for swimming lessons or play basketball. So it was all those other things that you, as a child, you start to do to sort of expand your horizons. She was very uncomfortable in those situations, especially initially. Didn't want to do it. This is the worst thing ever. I'm going to suck at this. So we did notice that early. And then when she went to school, because she was such a kind, quiet, compassionate kid, the teachers would put her with the person in the class that was probably the most rambunctious, hoping that Kate's kind of kind, quiet spirit would sort of help that person. And then we noticed that she would miss days of school, always had a stomach ache. So we did take her to a child psychologist after we talked to our doctor. And the child psychologist met with her 3 or 4 times. And just to sort of set this up, we were a very active family. We were always biking, hiking. I played hockey, baseball. My son played hockey, basketball, soccer. But Kate wasn't like that. So I think the child psychologist said to us, just go easy on her. She's going to be fine. And we're like, okay, everything's good. And, part of the problem is there's no feedback mechanism to know that she died, 18 years later. That was not the best advice to give. And I think if Katie hadn't been so quiet, I almost wish she had had a huge anxiety panic attack that we would have said, okay, see, there is something we got to deal with here. But that never happened. I remember Kelly Rudy, who's a hockey analyst and a goalie. His daughter went to school one day and just totally freaked out. And it kind of caught them off guard. And she just had this huge panic attack. But they were able then to treat that. With Kate, that never happened. So she learned to hide it. She learned to just accept things as they were. Yeah, she got sick once in a while. But she found a way to get through that on her own, which maybe wasn't the best way. So if I had to go back and fix anything, I have to go back to that time when she was 6, 7, 8 years old and really investigate that.
Do you know what it was that was kind of the source of the anxiety?
It's funny, because when I think back now, and I remember She was maybe 17. We were at my niece's house and they were having some drinks. And she had a couple drinks and she kind of looked at me sheepishly, like, should I, I had a couple drinks. But she had that look of being comfortable for the first time. Like it was a different look. And it kind of haunts me now when I think back to that first time. And I feel like when she had those drinks, it was like, wow, for the first time, I feel comfortable in this bigger group of people. I'm not worried about what they're saying about me. I'm not worried what they think about me. Is my hair okay? Yeah, I gained too much weight. Are they saying I'm fat? Like I learned later that those were the things that were going through her mind constantly. But when she had that drink, those things didn't go through her mind. And then, as she went through high school and your social circle expands a bit, and you get a little bit more autonomy, and out more. People always say, they get in with the wrong group of people. And I think in some situations that's true, but I think in a lot of cases they look for the people that can give them what they want. So the ones that could get easier access to alcohol, why don't you try smoking up? Because that'll make you even more calm. Oh, that you're still feeling anxious? Why don't you try this? So I think she was experimenting little bit by little bit as she got older. So we didn't notice it back then. I probably had too many drinks when I was, a kid too, and you kind of just like, well, you'll grow out of it. We all do, and you'll get responsibilities and move on. But that never happened with her. So I know when she went away to school, she was smoking a lot of marijuana, probably too much. And she had a lot of anxiety. Like the marijuana wasn't keeping her calm. She went to Fanshawe School and wanted to be on her own, but the first 3 nights she was like phoning us up, terrified every night, like this is awful. But then she kind of got comfortable on that. But I noticed the difference in her then. And then when she came back, she gained a lot of weight. I think that was part of the anxiety as well. And so she wanted a boyfriend, but a lot of guys didn't show interest. And then this one guy showed interest. And it turns out he was not a great guy. He has since died of an overdose, but had been in and out of jail. Called himself on Facebook the pharmacist. And I think he introduced her probably to opioids for the first time. So then there was a group of them that kind of hung out and were taking opioids. We noticed a big difference in her behavior. We tried to kind of rein it in. We tried to put some controls in place, try and get home by a certain time at night. But it was just mass chaos. And then I'm trying to think of the year, July of 2013, we could tell something was really wrong. The guy she was going out with at the time was definitely addicted, was trying some experimental drug that didn't really work for him. But it was mass chaos and she wanted help. So we brought her back into the house and we said, okay, let's try and control this from within. And she wanted that kind of control and liked the accountability. But it lasted like 2 weeks, and I could see them. Her and her boyfriend would sneak down the street and were selling drugs to some guy in a truck. I'm like, what are you selling drugs here? Well, we need some money. And it just wasn't, I couldn't, I always, I was a manager at work, a VP, and you're able to put a safety net around people so they're allowed to make decisions, but if you make a wrong decision, you don't completely fail. And I tried to do that with her. We tried to do it with her. Every weekend, the parties would come, the opioid addiction would be full force, and it would just all get blown up. So eventually we got her into a program of methadone. So she would go down and get the methadone. She'd be on, have to test because you have to be clean when you test. She'd get the methadone for a few days, maybe a week and a half, and then chaos would break out the next weekend and full-blown chaos and addiction. Like it was just, it was crazy. They were not fun times, and you're trying to have a life and you're trying to move on, but and you're trying to deal with this, but it just obviously wasn't working. So around that time, we decided we have to try and get her into something rehab. We didn't know, and here's the other thing: she didn't want us to talk to anybody about it. We couldn't talk to our family about it. We couldn't talk to our parents about it because she didn't want everyone to think that she was this druggie. So you're on your own. Like it's very lonely when you're in those situations. So we were able to, actually through our benefits at work, I was able to talk to somebody who suggested this place in Bowen Island in BC. So we kind of started to put a plan together to get her into the orchard. That was probably in the fall of 2013. So it's kind of a long answer to your question, but when we noticed, but that was really, really things got out of control in July 2013, even though we'd seen this getting worse as time went on. There was times when the police were at our house numerous times, or one boyfriend tried to commit suicide. I hate saying that term. He tried to die by suicide. And he had hooked up, pipes to his car and was sitting in a parking lot with the car running with, the pipes feeding into his car. And somebody came and knocked on his car and said, "Buddy, don't do it. I've been there. Don't do it." And he kind of went away. And then, we told the police about this. My daughter told me about it. And we're looking everywhere for him in the city. And the police are coming to my house, but they weren't really that nice to me about it. And I ended up going to a house to find my daughter. And the police showed up there. He goes, "Oh, you're here too. Why didn't you tell us this?" And I'm like, "Buddy, I'm just trying to, save this kid's life. And I don't know what your agenda is." But eventually we found the kid, and it worked out. But that was the kind of chaos you're going through. My whole life I never had to deal with police. I had friends who were policemen, but I never had any interaction with police. I never had a speeding ticket. I've been, somebody hit me 4 times, and rear-ending me in a car. I'd never caused an accident. It was always somebody hitting me. So those things were kind of strange to me. And then there was another time there was a robbery at a convenience store in Burlington. And again, the police were at our house, and they had our phone records, and I'm talking to the police about this stuff, and not about this stuff, but just about things in general. "Oh, I know some guys that work with you, kind of friendly." But when my daughter came home, I could tell she was very guarded. She was almost like an expert at answering their questions without giving in too much. Yeah, she did know the guy who committed the robbery. The guy had an obvious tattoo on his arm. But again, it was that chaos of dealing with the police constantly. It was the Bear unit. They look at armed robberies. But it was terrifying. They showed me the video of, the robbery, and somebody cold cocked, one of this Korean lady who owned the restaurant with a gun, knocked her out. Like, this is not stuff that we're normally, we're used to dealing with. Sort of the last thing that happened was our car got stolen out of our driveway, and it was used in a robbery in Paris. I think I know who it was. I think it was the boyfriend who's no longer alive. But I couldn't identify him in the pictures because it's kind of that night vision kind of stuff, and it was very hard to see what it was. So again, the cops were at our house asking us about this stuff. I mean, it just seemed constant, at that point. The chaos is just, it's everywhere. Addiction, I learned this later, but it's a family disease. Like, it doesn't just drag down the person who's suffering from the addiction, it drags down the whole family. And, you're trying to deal with it. But anyways, we headed off to Bowen Island on Boxing Day, 2013.
What was it like for you as a father and just as a human being to watch all this unfold?
Yeah, it just eats at you inside. Here I've got a job where I'm traveling to Europe all the time, and you're trying to hold this together as well. And luckily my wife and I were on the same page as far as decisions. I think she knew a little bit sooner that there was an addiction problem sooner than I did. But I eventually got on side with that, and we try to deal with it. It really helps to have a partner that, you're working together as opposed to against each other. It's not easy to deal with this. I have no control over it almost. But anyways, we eventually got there. The friend who had lent us use the apartment met us at Horseshoe Bay, which was really nice. Kind of made my daughter comfortable. So it was kind of moving well. And I remember when the boat took off, I looked out the back, and you see the wake of the boat, and I'm like, I was like, finally, we're safe. I didn't think it was, the end. I didn't think it was the cure for her addiction. But I thought it was the beginning to her recovery. You know, there's a saying by Winston Churchill when they, you know, when the Americans came, this isn't the end, but it's the beginning of the end. And I really felt like this was the beginning of her recovery, and that we were going to be okay. You know, and it was good. The people there were really nice. They took us in. It was a little unfortunate at Christmas time because it wasn't the services and support there, but it felt like a safe place. So for the first time, I felt like she was in a safe place. You know, at this point in time, I mean, one of the effects on me was my fingers would crack and bleed, and it was the stress of dealing with her. I'd never had this problem before, and it was just so run down and so beat up. My fingers would actually bleed. It was like someone took a knife and cut the ends of your fingers. It was extremely painful. So there was obviously physiological impacts on me as well as the psychological.
Do you need a minute, or
No, I'm okay. When she was in the rehab, I actually ended up moving to Vancouver. My work allowed me to work from, you know, apartment in Vancouver. And I was dealing with Europe anyway, so it didn't matter where I worked. So I was out there, but it was good because it was like a family day. I learned more about addiction on those family days than I ever did before. My two biggest sources of learning about addiction were Breaking Bad and the Saturday meetings at the Orchard. You know, the things like the 3 C's. You didn't cause it, you can't cure it. I've forgotten the last one. But anyways, I was learning these things and realizing that also that I wasn't on my own. Here's 30 other parents of these kids that were in there. Kids, some were in their 40s. You know, some were PhDs. One was a dentist. Like, these were accomplished people. But I learned a lot, and things seemed to be progressing pretty well. And there was actually a point when my wife and my son came out, and we went up to Bowen Island together, and it felt like we had our daughter back. There was clarity in her eyes. It was back to the soft, caring, loving person. The hugs felt different. Everything felt good. The next week I went back, and it was like the inmates were running the asylum. It was a bunch of them had sort of rebelled against this God thing in the 12 steps. And, you know, this is all bullshit, and we don't. And I thought, what happened? Like, this is in 1 week. What happened? We ended up at a placement in Richmond. It was another all-female place that we thought would be good for her. She was in for a while. Again, things went okay. She was ready to come back home, and then she came and lived with me for a couple of days and then took off. I couldn't find her. She was taking a bunch of stuff. I found a counselor out there. I did find her eventually. We got her into this counselor, and she wouldn't let me sit in the meetings, but she said, I could hear him saying as I was walking away, "Oh, that's a dangerous concoction to take. That's a very dangerous concoction." So anyways, the guy got her back into the female place because we actually left there to come home, and she went back in there, and she got some money in her bank account and went on a bender with another girl. Limo, drinking all night, drugs. Showed up back at the rehab, and they're like, "You're out." They kicked her out. At this point, this is already almost the end of February, I'd gone back to Hamilton. So she stayed with a couple of people she knew for a couple of days, and then my friend went and bought her ticket to get back to Hamilton by bus, because her plane ticket had run out. I was tapped out. The other place was cheaper, but we'd spent a lot of money. And so she took the bus home. I forget what day she got home, March 8th, something like that. And she, in her head, she knew she didn't want to come back to her house and there's guilt. There's a lot of guilt associated with addiction when they kind of come off the rails. So she was staying with a friend, and it really was a block and a half from her house. She came by her house one time, and she was on something. I could tell she was on something. And I didn't give the best answer. I said, "What are you on?" You know, a better thing to say would have been, "You don't look healthy. How can I help?" But I was scared, and I kind of reached out in anger. She took off and then went to a friend's place, was going to stay there, another friend, a couple of girlfriends. And they're like, something wrong with her. Like, she's throwing up, she's not well. So anyway, she ended up going back to the first place she was at, which we thought was also a safe place. And then the Saturday she passed, I took our dog for a walk. And I walked by the house, and it was kind of a busier street. And I looked at the house, and I'm like, something told me to go and knock on the door, but I didn't. So I went back home. We had friends come for dinner that night, and they left around 11 o'clock. And I kind of turned the lights off downstairs. I remember walking upstairs, and I looked out the front window. And this was a habit of mine from the chaos, that I would always look out expecting to see trouble. Someone stealing my car, or the police showing up. And anyways, I looked out. I said to my wife, the police are coming down the street. And there was a couple other people with them. And I remember we looked at each other and said, this isn't good. They came to the door. It was one policeman in uniform, one plainclothes, and then two outreach workers. And they came in and they told us, your daughter passed away, we think around 8:30 this evening. And that was it. They came in for a while. Honestly, the one policeman was kind of a dick. The other people were lovely people. The cop in uniform was actually a good person. So eventually we kind of kicked them out. And you lay there that first night thinking you're never going to sleep again. How are you ever going to recover? But, you fall asleep. And then you get up the next day, and then it's almost like recovery. It's one day at a time, by putting one foot in front of the other, having to deal with, a funeral and all the stuff that goes with that, and death certificates, and canceling passports and driver's license, and you just keep doing it one day at a time. But right then and there, we decided we were going to talk about this. So rather than have a funeral where, sort of a normal funeral, we decided that we were going to color it up a bit. My wife went to the funeral home, and they had all these black cloths out, and she goes, get rid of the black, I want something bright. I knew I couldn't speak at the funeral, so I did a recording about my daughter, and we talked about addiction, and we talked about mental health, and we talked about anxiety. My wife did a poem that addressed some of these same things. Like, we decided right from that day we were going to try and advocate for somebody else, and that's what we did.
What was the impact like on the rest of the family? Your other kids?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of guilt everyone feels. So as much as we felt, what if we'd done this? What if we'd done that? My son felt guilt. He felt like, even though they were 6 years apart and he was living in Toronto, that somehow he should have known more. He should have, we all felt the same. And we all did the best we could, for our daughter. And I'd do it all again if I thought I could save her. The parents were funny. They don't really understand. But we lived next door to my sister-in-law. And I remember we had in the backyard, we had a gazebo with a fire table. And we almost sat out there every single night, right into November, just quietly being with each other. It was very peaceful. It was actually very healing during that time, as far as the support from the family.
What would you say to other fathers or parents who might be in the same position, or are in the same position, or will be in the same position?
Yeah, this is something I've struggled with. So my wife and I have done a lot of advocacy. I've talked at different things, and we've done panel discussions and different overdose awareness days we've talked at. And I always feel bad because I never know what to say. There's no silver bullet. There's nothing that you can do or say. Tell them you love them. I don't buy this wait till they hit rock bottom stuff. My doctor actually said that. And I thought, what do you mean hit rock bottom? Rock bottom's death. Like that, nobody wants that. But the other thing any parent has to do that's going through it, you got to take care of yourself, because I said it's a family disease. And too often you get dragged down with it. drink lots of water. It's amazing how dehydrated you get from grief. Maybe it's the tears, but you gotta, it sounds weird to say, but drink twice as much as you think you need to take. You've got to get sleep. You've got to get exercise. Again, all those things, self-care is critically important. We've met, unfortunately, we've probably got a group of about 30 friends who've all lost children now. It's a terrible club to be in. But some of them have had serious medical issues, in the first 4 or 5 years of their child's loss, because they didn't take care of themselves. Some of them, had dealt with addiction issues on their own. Some of them just ate terribly. Some of them just never slept properly. They ended up in hospital with various, problems, health issues. So you have to take care of yourself. You can't support the rest of your family either if you end up being sick. So it's really important. Self-care is critically important. How you have to deal with mental health issues as early as you can, so that you can, you don't come to problem later. But I find we end up dealing with a lot of people with grief because they don't know where to go, and people don't understand the loss of a child and the loss of a child from addiction. I remember reading something when Kate first passed, just doing research on the internet. This lady had wrote a really nice article. And I thought, oh my God, she's still devastated. This must be pretty recent. Well, that was the 10th year anniversary. That's why she wrote the article. So I realized then that this is not something you get over with quickly. But I tell people there's resources out there. There's a Dr. Wolfelt who runs a grief clinic. And even though he doesn't he's probably dealing with it more now, but 9 years ago, he didn't really deal so much in child loss from addiction. But the resources they have and the advice he gives, and if anyone ever gets a chance to hear him speak, because he does come to Canada to speak, you got to go see him. Everything else, drink lots of water. It's amazing how dehydrated you get from grief. Maybe it's the tears. People do recover, people do die, but it's worth going through. Try and save your child. Tell your child you love them and hug them as much as you can, even through addiction. It's sometimes hard. I spoke at one Naranon group, and the one girl said to me at the end, I never realized, you said you loved your daughter a lot. I never realized that my parents loved me. I thought they hated me because what I've done to them. And I said, no, your parents still love you. It's just they want to see you get healthy, and they're scared, right? So love them, hug them, take care of yourself. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if it's rehab. I don't know if it's just doing it on their own with, some assistance with methadone. Some people can go cold turkey. I don't know what the answer is, but it's worth the fight.